Still waiting. Thought I got the funny doorbell. Sorry, folks, we're just waiting on the technical folks in the back room.
We are live on the website and Facebook. We can't get the cable broadcast going. I would just make that announcement so people know they can watch on those two platforms.
Sure.
Live.
On Facebook and on the website.
Yep.
All right. All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Kevin Staunton. I'm one of the council members. I'm sitting in for Mayor Hovland tonight. He is away. And I want to welcome you to the September 21 meeting of the City Council. One note before we begin, we are having some technical difficulties with the television, but we are live on the website and on Facebook, but the cable channel is having some technical difficulties. I'm sure it will be joined in progress when we're ready. So, I want to just, before we get started, there's a few things, housekeeping items I want to cover related to the technical issues as we kind of proceed with our post-COVID meetings in person. This meeting is being held both in person and electronically. Members of the City Council, some staff and presenters are presenting from the council chambers. Others are participating from their homes or offices. Before we begin, I want to just cover a few things for those hoping to participate in portions of the meeting. I want you to know the city is committed to continuing to receive and hear your input on matters. We have been collecting public input through voicemail and our engagement website, bettertogether.edina.org. It is important for you to know that all public hearing comments are read before we take action. You do not need to submit the same feedback in another way. All feedback is considered equally, regardless of the way in which it was submitted. Tonight, there will be 2 times for public comment, either in person or via telephone. The first is community comment portion of the agenda. On this portion of the agenda, you're allowed to speak about anything that is not on tonight's agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing. One of the notes that folks should be aware of, if you're here to talk about the Morningside infrastructure project, be aware that that is on tonight's agenda and it is not scheduled as a public hearing this evening, and so we're not going to take public comment during that agenda item or during community comment. And I just want to explain briefly the reason behind that. We just want to make sure that if we are going to take formal public comment, that everyone gets notice of that. And if we have public comment kind of in a de facto way, there are some folks who may not have heard about that and not been aware we were going to take public comment, and they may feel like it was unfair for them not to have been given a chance to provide public comment. So there will be discussion during the agenda item tonight. It's not a decision item, it's just an informational item. But I'm sure one of the items we will talk about is public engagement and how to ensure that we're making sure we hear from everyone on this important issue. So in addition to the community comment, you may also speak during public hearing after staff and the applicant have made their presentations. If you want to call in for community comment or to provide testimony for the public hearing, call this number, 1-800-374-0221 with conference ID 108-6418. Individuals in the room will be invited to come forward to speak first. Then we will hear from those who have called in. You will be given 3 minutes to speak. For those in the room, the red light at your podium will turn on when you are out of time. Staff will let anyone who knows on the call if they go over 3 minutes. Remember, you do not need to speak at the meeting or call in tonight if you have already provided feedback. Also, there's no need to repeat information that's already been presented. Speak at the meeting or call in if you have new comments or information to bring forward. Thanks in advance for your patience as we work to conduct this meeting in a hybrid format. We hope there will not be any issues, but have discovered already that there are, so we'll do our best to deal with them and continue the meeting as best we can if there are any glitches. So, with that, let's call the meeting to order, and Ms. Allison, can you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Anderson.
Here.
Councilmember Jackson.
Here.
Councilmember Pierce.
Here.
Acting Mayor Staunton.
Here. Next item is the Pledge of Allegiance. Those who can, please rise to join us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next up is approval of the meeting agenda. Are there any changes from staff to the meeting agenda?
No changes from staff, Your Honor.
Any council members who'd like to make a change to the meeting agenda? I'd take a motion to approve the meeting agenda.
So moved. Second.
Motion by Councilmember Pierce, second by Councilmember Anderson. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Just for folks in the audience, I just want to briefly give you an overview of the agenda this evening that we have just approved. First, we'll have community comment, which we talked about just a minute ago. And then after community comment is completed, we will have the city manager respond to any comments that were made at the last meeting. So sometimes during community comment, we'll get questions from members of the community, and we have staff research those questions, and Manager Neal will provide responses to that. Once that's complete, we'll adopt the consent agenda. Those are items that are approved by one single vote, and if there are any items that the council members want to take off of that for further discussion, we'll do that at that time. Following that, we'll have special recognitions and presentations. We have a proclamation declaring September 17 through 23 Constitution Week. We have an award of Minnesota Recreation and Park Association Award of Excellence, and we have the 2021 Images of Edina presentation. Following that, we'll have public hearings. We have one public hearing on the agenda for this evening. It is a new on-sale intoxicating and Sunday sale liquor license for Olive's Fresh Pizza Bar in Edina. And then following the public hearing, we will have reports and recommendations. There are six items in reports and recommendations, and you'll find those in the agenda. We'll go through those one by one. Those are not public hearings. Those will be discussion items for the council. And then finally, we'll finish up with commission correspondence. an update on aviation noise if there is one, and then mayor and council comments, manager comments, and then adjournment. So that's an overview of the agenda. And with that, we'll move to community comment. And just to give you an overview again of the process for community comment, we're going to hear from any resident or other member of the community who would like to speak about something not on tonight's agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing. We'll have the folks who are here in the room go first, and then once we're complete with folks in the room, then callers will be allowed to speak. If you want to participate in community comment by phone, call in now at 1-800-374-0221 with conference ID 108-6418. That's 108-6418. An operator will ask for your name and street address. To get in the queue to speak, press star 1. That's star 1. You'll be given 3 minutes to speak. And remember, for those in the room, you'll get a yellow light when you have about 30 seconds left, and then a red light when your 3 minutes is up. So with that, if there's anyone here in the room who would like to participate in community comment, this would be a good time to come forward. Mr. Thompson. Welcome.
Thank you.
If you could just, very good.
4244 Crocker Avenue in Edina. My comments today is really about today. Today is the first day of fall. It's also the International Day of Peace. It's also my second wedding anniversary day. But I just wanted to thank you for the way that you conduct business and to keep peace and finding common ground as the most important thing to hear from people. Tomorrow is the 60th anniversary of the Peace Corps. 50 years ago, I made a big decision in my life to join the Peace Corps, and it changed my life completely. And I am just so proud of the fact that there's so many ways that we can serve our community. And the Star Tribune informs me that tomorrow my op-ed will be in the Star Tribune. So I encourage everyone to read it. Thank you for your service and engagement in the city.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Anyone else who would like to participate in community comment this evening? All right, hearing none. Director Benarad, is there anyone on the phone that wants to participate in community comment?
I do have a resident on the line, but not indicating a desire to speak, so it must be for a later item on the agenda.
All right, so is it safe to proceed, you believe?
I do believe.
All right, thank you. So with that, we'll move on to the city manager's response to community comments from the prior meeting. Mr. Neal, anything to report?
I do. Thank you, Your Honor. We had one community comment from our first meeting in September, and it was 6 questions. And I'll lay the questions out for you and respond to each one of them sequentially. The first question was, how many full-time and part-time staff does the city employ? This number moves a lot during the year, not so much on the full-time employee numbers, but on the part-time employee numbers. It can range between 300 and 600 depending on the part of the year, especially with the scope of our Parks and Rec operations. So as of the last payroll period, we had 319 full-time employees, 393 part-time employees, and 263 seasonal employees. So that was the first question. The second question was, what percentage of city staff are currently vaccinated? And the city does not collect vaccination status of its employees. We don't collect that information because we don't do any different, at least at this point, we don't do any differentiation between employees on vaccination status. That may be changing as we go forward, but currently that's not something we do. Question number 3 was, which departments are back working in City Hall? And the answer to that is all of them. They are all at different capacities. Police work here, building inspections, community development, administration, finance, HR, communications, etc. They are all back working in City Hall. Question 4, is vaccination required to employees returning to the office? If not, is there a testing requirement? As I mentioned earlier, not at this time. We don't have a vaccination requirement to to work in City Hall or to work in other city facilities. But given the president's latest discussion or contribution in that way, we might be going in those directions. A lot of employers across the country are waiting to see how OSHA, both at the federal level and the state level, are going to rule on that and give us some guidance. We don't have guidance on it right now. Question number 5 was, how many staff members have contracted COVID, and when was the last case of COVID in the workplace? We do have this information, and as of today, we have had 62 employees indicate an infection, and they are required to report that status to us if they've tested positive with COVID. And the last COVID positive test in the workplace was 9/15, so it was last week. Finally, question number 6, will employees have the option of permanently working from home? We have had a flexible workplace policy in place for a number of years, and we got to perfect it to a large degree last year. So we have that option of permanently working from home, but right now, I don't believe that that's a case that we currently have, but we could, depending on the kinds of jobs that we have. That's all.
All right, thank you. Does that prompt any questions from the council? All right. Thank you, Manager Neal. Next item on the agenda is the adoption of the consent agenda. This is the portion of the agenda where we will approve a number of items by one single motion. There'll be no separate discussion of these items unless requested to be removed by a council member. If removed, it will be considered immediately following the adoption of the consent agenda. Are there any adjustments to the consent agenda? Any items that anyone wishes to remove from the consent agenda? All right. Hearing that, I'd entertain a motion to adopt the consent agenda.
So moved.
Motion by Councilmember Jackson.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Pierce. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The consent agenda is adopted. That brings us to the special recognitions and presentations section of the agenda. And the first item up is a proclamation declaring September 17 through 23 Constitution Week. I have a proclamation to read, and then I understand Diana Lynch from the Monument Chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution is here for a discussion. Very good. So, whereas it is the privilege of all Americans to commemorate the 234th anniversary of the drafting of the Constitution of the United States of America with appropriate ceremonies and activities, and whereas it is fitting and proper to officially recognize this magnificent document and the anniversary of its creation, and whereas Public Law 915 guarantees the issuance of a proclamation by the President of the United States of America designating September 17 through 23 as Constitution Week. Now, therefore, the City Council of the City of Edina hereby proclaim the week of September 17 through 23 as Constitution Week, and urge all citizens to study the Constitution, reflect on the privilege of being an American with all the rights and responsibilities that that privilege involves, and reaffirm the ideals of the Constitution. Dated this 21st day of September 2021. I'm going to come down and give this to you directly. We'll get a picture, and then I'd like to hear from you.
On behalf of Monument Chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution, I want to thank the Edina City Council for designating September 17th through 23rd, 2021 as Constitution Week. This week will be in recognition of the 234th anniversary of the drafting of the Constitution. I want to thank you for your time this evening, and I hope you have a productive meeting. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Ms. Lynch. All right, next up is the Minnesota Recreation and Park Association Awards of Excellence, an introduction by Tracy Peterson. Ms. Peterson, welcome.
Good evening, Acting Mayor Staunton and council members. I'm Tracy Peterson, Assistant Director of Recreation and Facilities. Each year, the Minnesota Recreation and Park Association recognizes agencies or organizations in Minnesota for outstanding achievements in various categories. In May 2021, the Minnesota Recreation and Park Association selected the Dear Edina Pen Pal program and their activity program for an award of excellence in programming and events category, and our Pumpkin Smash Bash event for an award of excellence in the sponsorship and partnerships category. I would like to specifically recognize Tiffany Bushland, Amanda Clark, and Nicole Gorman for their above and beyond efforts with these award-winning projects. Tonight, I'd like to introduce Chelsea Swigum from the Minnesota Recreation Park Association Awards Committee, here to present our awards.
Ms. Swigum, welcome.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks for being here this evening.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Chelsea Swigum, and I am a recreation coordinator from the city of Inver Grove Heights, so I come from not that far away. It is my honor to be here tonight to present a Minnesota Recreation and Park Association 2020 Award of Excellence to Edina's Park and Recreation Department. In fact, I will be presenting 3 awards because they've done such a fantastic job. However, before I do that, I want to take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about the Minnesota Parks and Recreation Association. Henceforth, I'll be referring to it as MRPA. The MRPA was formed in 1937 to foster the growth and development of the parks and recreation profession throughout the state. The MRPA Awards Committee was created in 1987 with the purpose of acknowledging individual members and agencies for their excellence in the field of Parks and Rec. The Awards Committee feels it is important to increase awareness of and appreciation for the excellent parks, trails, facilities, recreation programs, and services that are occurring in Minnesota. The Awards of Excellence program is presented by MRPA and proudly sponsored by our partner, Highway Federal Credit Union. So on behalf of the MRPA Awards Committee, it is my pleasure tonight to present an award of excellence to Edina Parks and Recreation's team for the winning projects: Rectivity Box, the Pumpkin Smash Bash, and the Senior Center's Dear Edina Pen Pal program. So thank you all for allowing me to be here, and congratulations to your Parks and Recreation team on their 3 awards. And here is one of the 3.
Terrific.
Thank you.
All right. The third and final agenda item under special recognitions and presentations this evening is the 2021 Images of Edina presentation. This is one of my favorites annually. And we have Katie Laux here to do the honors for us. Welcome.
Good evening. Good evening, Acting Mayor Staunton and council members. I'm Katie Laux, graphic designer here at the City of Edina. And tonight I have the pleasure of announcing the winners of the 2021 Images of Edina photo contest. First, just a little bit of background about the photo contest. The city established Images of Edina in 2004 to recognize and collect photographs that capture Edina as a place for living, learning, raising families, and doing business. The city and Edina Magazine co-sponsored the contest again this year. Each year, residents and employees who work in Edina are invited to submit their favorite photos taken over the past year in the community. The photos are judged on a variety of elements, including composition, lighting, and degree of difficulty. This year, we had 59 submitted photos. A judging panel of communications professionals chose the winning photographs in 5 categories. There was also an online vote on Edina Magazine for the Reader's Choice Award. Of the category winners, 1 photo was chosen as the overall best in show, which will be revealed at the end of this presentation. So, on to the winners. And some of the winners will be attending online and some are in person, I believe, tonight. So for any winners here, please step forward when I call your name and you can have your photo taken and accept your award. Okay. On to the winners. So for the activities and events category, our winner is Leah Steidel for Trick or Treat. Congratulations, Leah. Congratulations. Elbow, yeah, let's do that. Yeah. Congrats. Okay, the next category is business, and the winner for this is Patricia Willett for Sweet Treat at Snuffy's. Congratulations.
Come on up, we'll take a picture.
And the next category is people. The winner is Rebecca Peterson for A Curly Monkey.
Becky is joining us online. She's waving at us.
Oh,
congratulations.
Great. Congrats. The next category is places in Edina. And the winner is The Streaks of 62 by Yash Mangalik. Is he online? Congratulations. Okay, and then the plants and animals category, the winner is Martin Freeman for Visible Breath of Wren Song. Proud of his Edina house too. It's a great photo. Okay, and now we're going to go on to the Reader's Choice Award, and this again is Rebecca Peterson, A Curly Monkey. Congratulations. Okay, and the final Best in Show goes to Martin Freeman for Visible Breath of Wren Song. Proud of his Edina house too. Winners joining online will mail your award to you, and I hope everyone has their camera ready to take some great shots for next year. Congrats to all the winners for their beautiful photos.
Thank you. Thanks to those who came down, too. and attended online. It was fabulous pictures. All right, now we're going to move to the public hearings portion of the agenda. As I mentioned earlier, there is one public hearing on the agenda this evening. And before we get to that public hearing, I just want to remind folks that we'll now hear from folks who would like to provide testimony in this matter, which is the new on-sale intoxicating and Sunday sale liquor license for Olive's Fresh Pizza Bar in Edina, DBA Olive's Fresh Pizza Bar in Edina. We'll have, as we did during community comment, we'll have any speakers in the chambers go first, and then we'll follow with folks online. If you are online and would like to participate, call in now at 1-800-374-0221 and use conference ID 1086418. That's 1086418. An operator will ask for your name and street address, and then to get into the queue, press *1. You will be given 3 minutes to speak. For those in the room, remember the yellow light means 30 seconds left, and the red light means it's time to wrap up. And for those calling in, staff will let you know if you go over your 3 minutes. So with that, is there anyone here? Well, let's introduce the item before we get there. So the public hearing will be introduced by our City Clerk, Sharon Allison. Ms. Allison.
Your Honor, members of the council, Olive's Fresh Pizza Bar Edina, as the name states, is a pizza restaurant that will be located at 5820 Lincoln Drive. This is a space previously occupied by D. Bryans, for those who are familiar with D. Bryans. Olive's will be a full-service restaurant with table service, delivery, and to-go options. They are scheduled to open end of year or early 2022. The co-owner, John Marshall, was not able to join us tonight, but staff is recommending approval of this liquor license. And instead of carrying it over for the next council meeting, I'm recommending that you approve it tonight.
Just for folks in the audience and watching online, we have had a practice on our public hearings of doing our public hearing and then making the decision at the next meeting. The one exception has been liquor licenses generally. And so this evening, staff is recommending that we make a decision on the liquor license tonight. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Any questions from council before we open the public hearing? All right, we'll open the public hearing and ask anyone who is interested in commenting to come forward. Seeing no one in the chambers interested, Ms. Benarad, anyone online that you can tell?
I still have someone on the line not indicating a desire to speak. As a reminder, if you would like to speak remotely, once you've connected to the operator, please press star, the asterisk sign, then the number 1, not pound, but asterisk 1. That will indicate to us that you are wishing to speak, and then we'll introduce you. Because it has not yet been a full minute and there is a delay in the broadcast, I would recommend we wait before we move on. My clock shows that it's 7:34, so I will come back to you when I have someone in the queue, or 7:35, whichever comes first.
Very good.
A minute is now passed, and I don't have anyone in the queue, so I think it's safe for you to move forward with your agenda.
All right, thank you. With that, I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Member Jackson, second by Member Pierce. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Any items or questions, further discussion from the council before we entertain a motion to approve? I'd entertain a motion to approve the liquor license for the on-sale intoxicating and Sunday sale liquor licenses for Olives Fresh Pizza, LLC, DBA Olives Fresh Pizza Bar in Edina.
So moved.
Second.
Motion from Member Jackson, second by Member Anderson. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion carries. I'm pleased to say this is across the street from my new residence. I'll be looking forward to them opening. All right, so that concludes our public hearings for this evening. The next up is reports and recommendations. And the first item under reports and recommendations is the new consumption and display permit for Wooden Hill Brewing Company, LLC, DBA Wooden Hill Brewing Company. This is an item that we held the public hearing on at our last meeting, and we're following up. So, Ms. Allison, do you want to introduce this matter?
Absolutely. Your Honor, members of the council, you may recall that this public hearing was held at the last meeting, September 9th. And for this one, we held the public hearing open until September 13th. We have not received any comments, and staff is recommending approval of the consumption and display permit for Wooden Hill Brewing Company.
All right, any questions from council? Further discussion? I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Motion by Member Jackson,
Second.
second by Member Pierce. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion carries. All right, next up is Bristol and Mavell Park Linmar Basin Stormwater Project Concept Plan Summary Report, and Jessica Wilson will be reporting on this. Ms. Wilson, you are excused from the conversations outside the chambers. You're leaving that to Mr. Bintner.
Yes, he's in good company, though. He's got some other consultants out there with him. But yes, I was closely watching the screen.
Good to see.
Good evening. Thank you. So I have a quick presentation, an update on the Bristol and Mavell Park, also called Linmar Basin, and then a request for approval of the concept plan. So my outline for tonight, I'm going to bring you through the project goals, project purpose, funding, and the decision to be made tonight, how we engage with the public, what our final concept design ended up as, and how the public influenced that final design, and then project costs and benefits, and then next steps and discussion. So staff and consultants involved in this project, I'm the Water Resources Coordinator, Ross Bintner, also in the Engineering Department, Tom Swenson and Perry Vetter over here are from our Parks Department, and then Randy Anhorn, he's the Administrator for the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District, and he is on the call, available for questions and conversation at the end, and then his consulting engineers, Janet Kiefer and Matt Kumka. So the goals of the project were to partner with the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District to study options for stormwater improvements at the park. The goal is to improve the water quality of downstream Lake Edina and water bodies downstream from that, to reduce the flood risk in the South Cornelia neighborhood. While we're there, enhance natural resources, including providing pollinator habitat, keep a portion of that space open for passive recreation, and consult with residents in the process. And so we started a Better Together Edina project page where we gathered input, and we informed the public of the project and made plans to meet with them and get feedback from them. So Lake Cornelia and Lake Edina are not meeting clean water goals. Both have had recent recreational advisories due to blue-green algae blooms, and when that happens, we advise people to have no contact with the water in those water bodies. 9 Mile Creek Watershed District studied the sources of pollution and recommendations to improve Lake Cornelia and Lake Edina in 2019 and in 2020. They have levied funds, and they also have grant funds available to implement capital improvement projects to improve the water quality. And the decision we're asking you to make tonight is whether to proceed with the project by approving the concept level design. So to set the stage a little bit on what the proposed project is, on the left is a map that shows where the park is located. So you can see Southdale Mall in the top right of that left image, and then downstream Lake Edina. On the right, it's a zoomed-in photo of that park, Bristol and Mayville Park, also called Linn-Mar Basin, or as the neighbors affectionately call it, Ditch Park. It drains a 20-acre sub-watershed, and then that water flows through pipes down to Lake Edina. Water that leaves Lake Edina enters 9 Mile Creek. That ditch park already functions as a stormwater feature. It performs some flood benefit already in attenuating flood flows. And our proposal would be to make that park work a little bit harder for stormwater, so provide some water quality benefit and a little bit more flood protection benefit while also maintaining the recreational use there. So in April 2021, we had a public participation plan that we shared with you. And our goal is to obtain public feedback on the uses of the park and our alternatives that we propose. We want to inform people about the clean water goals and the condition of Lake Edina downstream. And we wanted to inform them about the flood risk in the neighborhood and the potential natural resources benefits, water quality benefits, flood risk benefits that we could realize with a project here. So we made a promise to keep them involved, listen to and acknowledge concerns and aspirations, and provide feedback on how public input influenced the decision, and that's what we're doing tonight. On the right, that's the life cycle of the project. So we are at this make a decision stage, and then we're going to follow up with everybody and let them know what decision was made. This is I don't want to bury the lead too much, so this is our concept design, and then I'll talk more about what we heard from the public and how that input was used to reach this is our final design. So the project involves grading and lowering that portion, the southern portion of the park. And I'll orient you a little bit here. This is turned 90 degrees. So the Bristol Boulevard is actually to the west of the park. Linn-Mar Lane is to the east. Mayville Drive, which is showing at the left of your screen, is to the north. So the project, we're proposing to grade and lower the south portion of the park by about 1 foot. And in that graded extent, we would replace that with native vegetation and trees. The purpose of grading and lowering is it already provides some flood protection benefit. We can get more flood protection benefit by lowering it. And then we also create a space for water to infiltrate into the ground while it's there. We think the soils are pretty good there, although we haven't gotten to the point of doing actual soil borings yet. And so we think we can get some good infiltration benefit here before that water would go to Lake Edina untreated. We're proposing to add a path here. You can see that kind of stretching along Linn-Mar Lane, and that would be a 5-foot sidewalk. That would be an extension of the Safe Routes to School. It connects to Hazelton Road on the east, which is on the top of the picture, and Mayville Drive to the north, which is on the left of the picture. There is some tree removal planned. So the red circles represent areas where we're going to be removing trees to accommodate grading and the addition of the path. The white circles are areas where we intend to protect those trees. And then the black circles outline where we could add new trees. As far as what's there right now, there's pipes that come in right in the center of the park at Hazelton Road and then directly across from the park. And the cottonwoods and the other kind of scrubby, weedy trees that are in the middle of the park right now were not planted and were not planned. So what likely happened is as stormwater flows into that space, and it would be a soggy, wet area, it was difficult to mow. And so it would mow around those areas, and then volunteer tree seeds blow in, and they grow up, and then we continually just kind of mow to the edge of them. So they weren't put there intentionally, or they weren't planted. They're kind of their volunteer trees by accident. And they're big. Part of the reason that we're proposing to remove them is first to accomplish that primary goal of stormwater improvements. And then also it's difficult to grade really close to large trees and have them be healthy and survive long term. So we don't want to create a hazard by cutting too close to roots of large trees. We want to just do it right from the get-go, take out those big trees that could be hazardous in the future if we have to cut too close or grade too close, and then we can replace with new trees. And then one tree removed along Linn-Mar Lane to accommodate a path. So the primary benefits, I've been talking about the flood reduction benefit and the storm runoff reduction benefit. Those are the primary goals and the primary benefits of the project. And then some of those other secondary benefits while we're there. We can enhance the habitat, we can improve the park space, and we can do a little bit of education about flood risk and stormwater infiltration and natural habitat. So as far as the flood risk benefit, there's two pictures here on the top. The one on the left shows 100-year flood inundation. And so this is a 7.5-inch rain event in a 24-hour period. And in the dark blue, this is the existing condition in a 100-year event or a 10-year event on either picture. And then the red shows what the improvement would be post-project. So we see a reduction in the 100-year flood elevation, an improvement there, and same with the 10-year storm. So what did we hear from the public? General support for the primary benefits, the stormwater runoff collection and flood risk reduction. General support for those secondary benefits, habitat enhancement, park improvements, and educational opportunities. We heard people wanted to keep the space open for unstructured play. We heard people wanted to protect high-value trees and plant additional trees where there was space, and then to protect people from flooding. So how that input was used or not used. The input that we used, we took the path alignment and width that people preferred. The alignment goes on the interior of the park to protect those trees that are already existing on Linn-Mar Lane. We had a concept at one time that had a retaining wall that did not have any support, so we removed that option. People wanted the planted area to look intentional. They wanted new trees, perhaps flowering trees, shrubs, and flowering plants. Make it easy to maintain, save trees along the edges, optimize that remaining open space for passive recreation. Football, frisbee, soccer, sledding, that's already occurring there. Input that we did not use, we are still proposing to remove those two large cottonwoods at the bottom of the basin. We heard support for removing trees, but it wasn't unanimous. And then proposed removal of one tree along the edge of Linn-Mar Lane to accommodate that path remains part of the concept plan. So quickly, the planning level cost estimate, cost benefit. The planning level cost estimate, $898,000, and there's some ranges there because there's some uncertainty. This is a concept level design. We expect that this basin, after the retrofit, could handle 91% of the runoff from this 20-acre subwatershed and remove 13 pounds of phosphorus per year annually. That would end up in downstream Lake Edina. So the next steps, 9 Mile Creek Watershed District Board has already conditionally approved the concept plan and authorized staff to undertake a feasibility study pending City Council approval. And for staff to undertake the feasibility study, that means the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District staff. And then the detailed feasibility study has several components. After that, after the study is done, they would hold a public hearing on the study and then consider ordering the project. Right around that same time, the city and watershed district would negotiate a cooperative agreement, and then the city council will have another chance to consider approval of that cooperative agreement, potential design and bid this winter, and then potential construction in 2022. And with that, I will pause and take any questions or comments that you have.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Questions from the council? Member Jackson.
Thank you, Your Honor. So first of all, on the graphic it shows, so first of all, thank you very much for all the work. This is a really clear presentation, and I appreciate the work. I know the neighborhoods down there are really concerned about flooding. So anything we can do to make that, improve that, plus to do the surface waters is great work. The first question I have for you is about the tree removal. It looks in your graphic like you're going to replace at least as many trees as you take down, but is that part of the plan to have a minimum of a 1-for-1 tree replacement?
We have not made that a specific goal, but it looks like we're at 30%. We're just kind of making some general guesses of what something could look like. So as we get further into feasibility, we could see what's possible to fit in there. But there's a lot of value in having a variety, like shrubs and herbaceous plants too. So I think that's undecided, but we could fit. I'd have to check in with the landscape architect to see what the recommendation on spacing would be.
Okay. We are looking to improve the number of trees in town and preserve our canopy, and you know that. But I just, would ask that you recommend or ask about it, and I'd love to see a 1-for-1 minimum replacement. The other question is, in the second to last slide, you talked about a removal of something, and if you could tell me, it was a little fast and technical. I'm afraid I didn't quite catch it. Yeah, the estimated annualized cost per pound TP. What is TP? I didn't understand that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for giving me another chance to explain that. So TP is total phosphorus, and phosphorus is one of those nutrients that really fuels algae growth and like nuisance level plant growth. So if we're trying to keep a plant from being so productive and such a good generator of algae in plants, a promising strategy is to remove the nutrients that fuels that growth.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's all.
Other questions? Member Anderson.
Thank you, Your Honor. Number one, Ms. Wilson, thank you for your clear presentation. It's very informing. I heard today, actually I reached out to Nora Davis, who either chaired or co-chaired, if I recall, the stormwater study, the resident stormwater study. That goes back, I think, a couple of years. So I'll just read to you very quickly a couple of sentences. Yes, I've been following the Linmore Basin project. Glad the basin will continue to do what it was meant to do, contain floodwater. There was a lot of water over there in 1987. And goes on to say, actually, she's quite jealous, though she does live in Cornelia, quite jealous, wish our neighborhood had that level of protection. So it seems to me that reflects pretty much the feedback that you received. And as we've discussed often, stormwater may be the biggest infrastructure challenge that we face over the next several years. On a day-to-day basis, we sometimes forget. In a drought year, gee whiz, there's no water. We're not flooding anywhere. But just a couple of years ago, there were a lot of houses that sustained significant damage and a loss of quality of life that goes with it. And so I think this is a real good step in the right direction. So thank you for your hard work.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Pierce.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you very much for your presentation. There's a lot to like about this, and so I definitely appreciate the hard work. It's really nice to see work that has a benefit, in this case, flood protection, and it's also bringing other benefits to the community, the sidewalk, additional green space for recreational purposes. There's a lot to like about this, and so again, thank you for your work. If you could go back to slide 9, I think it was. I think we just bounced off that too fast. Yeah, so if you could just review this slide one more time with the before and after.
Sure. So on the top, there's 2 hypothetical storms. On the left is a 100-year storm, and that's where we get 7.5 inches in a 24-hour period. And on the right would be what we call a 10-year storm, or a 1 in 10 chance that could happen during any year, and that would be about 4.8 inches within a 24-hour period. So the dark blue is what we would expect at the peak of the storm. So at the worst of the worst, that's how high the water would get. And that's today, like existing conditions, based on the best available information that we have. The red would show after the project was built, what we propose the condition would be in the future. So some reduction in risk. More of the water is actually making its way into the basin and staying in the basin and not spilling over into the streets as much. So in the graph then, we can show the elevations that we see for existing conditions in a 100-year, in the graph that's actually on the right side. So it would go from a peak high elevation of 854.4 down to 853.9, so a reduction in half a foot. And then in the 10-year storm, we see a reduction in about 1.2 feet at the peak of the storm. And these are modeled, so it's not based on a past storm. It's kind of a hypothetical storm, what we think we could achieve.
Thank you.
Just one question I had in terms of the vegetation. Can you tell us a little bit about how to select the vegetation? I assume you want vegetation that can resist a lot of water or take advantage of a lot of water. How does that work?
Yeah, great question. And the actual plants have not been decided yet, but you're exactly right. We want plants that are going to do well with a little bit of wet feet. And we do expect it to drain down within a 48-hour period, so they're not trees or shrubs or plants that need to sustain really long periods of being wet, but certainly up to 48 hours, we'd want plants that are good at that. When we get into the feasibility study, we're going to do some soil borings and we'll get a much better idea of how quickly we can infiltrate that water, and that might help us select those plants then.
Because I assume that the reverse is also true. There are plants that will do really badly in that kind of wet environment.
Yes, yeah, and this leads me to another thought where we have a program now for actively maintaining our natural areas, and so this is one where annually we'll stop out several times a year. We'll check on the plants. We'll make sure that it's not being overtaken by invasive species and buckthorn. So we really want it to be a high quality natural area too. So we'll take care of it, and then if plants are failing in that space, we have an opportunity to catch it and to replace those.
Great. Any further questions? So the action that you want us to take tonight is?
To approve the concept plan.
All right, is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Commissioner, or Member Jackson moves.
Second.
Member Pierce seconds. Member Anderson thirds. Is there further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Thank you, Ms. Wilson.
Thank you.
All right, so next up is the event many in the chambers have been waiting for, the Morningside Flood Infrastructure Project 30% Design Check-In. Mr. Bintner is here along with Ms. Wilson and Mr. Razumelski. I get that remotely correct? All right. Well, welcome. I understand this is an update. There will be no action requested. It's for discussion purposes. Mr. Bintner, you're going to lead us off?
I am.
All right, welcome.
Acting Mayor and City Council, my name is Ross Bittner. I'm the Engineering Services Manager with the city. I'm going to give Jessica just a little bit of a break before we bring her back up here to take a piece of the presentation. So I'm going to be leading you through some of the commitments that we've made. The council last met in April to set us off on a course for design. And then I'm going to be handing it over to Jessica Wilson, our Water Resource Coordinator, to talk about the public engagement that's taken place as part of the landscape design. Then we'll be handing it off to Fred Razumelski, a landscape architect with Bar Engineering, so that he can give you a sense for the work behind the design in both the Weber Park and the Lynn and Kipling area. And then they'll hand it back to me. I'll talk about what commitments that we've made and met through that initial approval from the council, a couple technicalities with some modified recommendations, and then we'll detail our next steps and leave time for discussion. So this was a slide that we shared in April, and I'm going to cover the two items, both the service and the alignment to the City Council strategy that are lightly outlined there. As I said, Jessica is going to be taking that second one, the process and the engagement, Fred, the natural resource portions. But we'll also recap this slide with the commitments that we've been able to keep as part of the design. So the first part, we showed you some existing conditions, flood risks in the neighborhood. We also showed you what 3 different scopes of project could do. We elected to go forward with the $10 million or bigger option, and we are tracking in our design at about the same level of benefits that we anticipated as part of that concept design. So while I don't have maps for the whole city for the exact point of where the 30% design is, I wanted to assure you that we are seeing the benefits accruing to the extent that we had anticipated. We also talked
Mr. Bittner,
about,
could you go back and maybe toggle back and forth between those two? I think that's a really helpful comparison. Great, thank you.
and these are all in the technical memo that's part of the council packet tonight. So if anyone wanted to go back and review those from the April 20th, I also made them available at this council agenda. So the other 2 key pieces that I wanted to reiterate is our alignment with the council strategy. So the infrastructure, I think the last agenda item, really kind of same story here. We want to make sure that when we're planning infrastructure, and we're planning renewal of infrastructure in the Morningside neighborhood to a big extent in the next 2 years, that we do it in a way that is thinking ahead, designing for the resiliency in that infrastructure. Where the pond project, the park things that you're seeing today are necessitated by the larger pipes that we're planning to put in as part of those projects. We want to make sure that we're incorporating the life cycle cost to make sure that we're adapting to the climate, and that we're able to maintain, that we're putting good durable infrastructure in that's not going to be burdened on maintenance. The other key is how we get that done. We could have 2 people in a room, really smart, and just make all the decisions, but we would be far off the target for what the public expects. So we wanted to do this in alignment with the council's Better Together strategy, where we make sure that the decision-making process is well understood, clearly defined, that individuals understand and know how they can participate. We communicate what feedback we're using and why, and that we make that available in many places in methods so that everyone can participate in the process and all voices are heard. We think that we're aligned well with both of these strategies, strong foundation, better together. This is one that professionally, I'm really proud of the work that we've done. I say to residents, I don't take down 6 acres of trees in one area lightly. I'm a nature guy myself. It's only for the benefits and with the absolute assurance that we've really optimized, and we need the public to do that. So I wanted to thank the public that have come out and that have shared their input with us. It's made this project better. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to talk more about engagement to Jessica.
Thank you. Well, again, so in April 2021, we brought a public participation plan that was approved at the time that the engineering scope was approved. And that was an add-on to a process that we started in May of 2020. And our goal for this portion of the design was to obtain public feedback on the analysis, alternatives, and decisions. And then we made a promise to keep the public informed, listen to and acknowledge concerns and aspirations, and provide feedback on how that input influenced the decision. So how does this process work? We start with experts in engineering, water and natural resources management, flood risk, parks and recreation, and landscape architecture, and we put together our best version of a design. Any designer will tell you that a design is never finished. It just gets to a point where it's good enough or you run out of money to do that design. So we put together our best version of that design, and then we share that with residents and seek their input. And we acknowledge that residents are experts in their own right, in the sense of place, neighborhood feel, public attitudes, community values, desired amenities, and tax burden. So we put together our best version of the design, and we give it to residents to react to, and boy, did they react. We got a lot of reactions, and we're really thrilled by that. We got hundreds of comments from hundreds of people, and I think you guys have gotten a lot of reactions too. So then our next step, Fred is going to talk more about how the design has been modified a little bit to accommodate that input, and I'll share with you what we heard and the input that we used or what we didn't use, and we'll describe why we did or didn't use it. And then this next step in the process is to share that design with you, describe how that input was used or not used, and then also describe the trade-offs, constraints, opportunities that we see, and make recommendations. If we were to design a park that was purely for flood risk reduction, it would look different than the design we've provided. If we were going to design a park strictly for dog walkers, it would look different than it does today. If we were going to provide it strictly for athletics, it would look different than it does today. So this is our attempt to layer in all of those uses and get as close as we can to accommodating them. So this is what we heard. These are kind of grouped into categories generally. We had a lot of people request clarity on how this is going to look. And clarifying impacts to specific areas. At 30% design, there's some things that we just don't have the detail or we don't have the answers for yet. We heard a request to talk to more people and extend the comment period. We heard people asking if we were still accommodating their use of the park and the woods. In the flood infrastructure group, we heard, does the flood benefit still accrue throughout the neighborhood? We've heard comments about the park swale, where it's proposed, it cuts open space in two, makes it smaller, chunks it up a little bit, and a desire to keep the large open space. Natural resources, we often hear about the woods and Weber Park, but also we're hearing a lot from the Lynn Kipling inundation area, where folks are wondering if we're adding native plants to the park or not, and where and how big, and those decisions are kind of a later detail where those things can be a little bit flexible right now. A question about will this project be a loss for wildlife and dog walking? A request to clarify impacts to specific trees and explain the approach that we're taking for tree and natural resource restoration. And then in Weber Park and the woods, why is this focused on the park? Folks were thinking, if this is a flood project, why are you doing any moving of amenities in the park? And then we got some requests for add or don't add various amenities like a pool, a skate park, soccer, playground, disc golf, etc. Do or don't add a fence in the woods. We've heard both sides of that. We've heard don't add outfield fence at the baseball, softball fields. And then there's a trade-off here. Do you leave more open space or do you replace with more trees? Reconfigure the hockey rink or leave it where it is, improve, and then a request to improve turf and open field areas to make it more usable for those unstructured play. So how input was used or not used. The input that we've used, we heard that the open ice skate rink, the size that we proposed in our best version of the design that we presented in August was too small, so we've increased that size a little bit. We've moved trees to the edges of the park to accommodate that open, free play space. We're irrigating the field for that unprogrammed play in the center of the park. We heard people that want a more higher quality open play space that's better graded, better turf quality. We heard a request for some covered pavilion for picnicking and seating. There are some options in what we could do for a gathering space, and we heard a covered pavilion was preferred, so we can move forward with an option like that if everyone's okay with that. And then the size and placement of new natural planting areas, that's often something that we can decide later in the design process. So we're still very much open to people giving us feedback on how they move about this space. Feedback that we're not using, amenities we're not adding, we're not proposing to add a skate park, pool or splash pad, volleyball, disc golf, any of those other amenities. We're keeping the amenities in the park, the same number of baseball fields, we're not touching the tennis court or the basketball court, things like that. The swale placement remains between the baseball, softball fields. That remains part of the design. The outfield fencing at the baseball and softball fields remains part of the design. And then the new rink placement along Grimes remains part of the design. And with that, I want to ask Fred to come up and he can walk through the design.
Good evening, members of the council. I'm going to talk through the surface treatments throughout the project area. I'm going to talk through the natural resources and natural plantings, and then the recreation. So I'm going to start with drivers for the project. First of all, and importantly, that of flood storage. At the Lynn Kipling area, there has been the expansion of the pond. On the east side, there's an expansion to the west here of the existing Weber Pond, and then the expansion of the pond up into Weber Woods. Another driver was that of to relieve flooding on Grimes. In this area, we have created this swale that will bring this water to Weber Pond. In a swale, there's also a trail in that swale, which is a gradual sided swale. And then lastly, that of recreation. And we are keeping, as Jessica had mentioned, the existing recreational features, updating and improving them, and adding some other minor features. So I'm gonna walk through different areas. I'm gonna start here at Lynn Kipling. You'll see here a fair amount of open water. The contour lines here are a little jagged. When it comes time we get deeper into design, we'll smooth that out and make that more natural looking. In this diagram, this tone here of the lighter colored trees are the trees that will remain, and then the darker trees are those trees and shrubs and native plantings that will be restored. Our goal is to make this as natural as possible. We have very gradual side slopes that will make it look like a natural wetland. But indeed, we do need to get a fair amount of storage. But in the end, this will look very natural. Oh, and one other thing is we along Lynn Avenue with the street reconstruction project, they're in the process of investigating a sidewalk so that there's pedestrian circulation through this area. All right, then I'm going to move over to the east side and talk about the ponds there. So the Weber Pond is going to be expanded mainly to the west on this side, and then looking up into the pond extended into Weber Woods, you'll see that there is an extensive trail system. Our goal was to maintain as best we could the casual use of this area of the park. If you look across, this is where 41st Street comes through. There's a bituminous path, a crossing of the pond in a boardwalk. There's actually 2 boardwalks to create these loops, and then the bituminous walk extends over here to where the pump station will be. In white are earthen trails and several loops through this end of the park. We are retaining trees and a buffer to France Avenue. There will be some thinning of trees, those that are invasive or leaning and dangerous. So the little bit Siberian elms and buckthorn will be removed through there. You can see that in the extent of these contour lines show the extent of grading. So trees will be removed in that area, but we'll be extensively planting both trees, shrubs, and herbaceous plants, and so that eventually this will be closed, that'll be really quite wooded. We were able to save a fair amount of space on the west end here. And there we're going to restore woodland and oak savanna. There are some beautiful oaks through this area that were open grown, and I'll show you in another picture what I mean by that. And so we're going to thin to allow those to grow beautifully and create a resilient and maintainable plant community. Also in the trail system, you'll see these symbols that are nodes, and that's we'll design seating and possibly interpretation, and we'll figure that out further in the next phase of design. Moving down to the southern end. Okay. Okay, this is actually a rendering. Let me, at the southern of the boardwalks looking to the north. And so you can see the two boardwalks will determine the type of boardwalk in the next phase of design, but you can see looking across the woodland and the trees that are preserved, the trails that are installed. This gives a bit of a feel of the future landscape. The boardwalks, we're looking at several different types, and we'll determine what's going to be most feasible for maintainability and use. Here is what I'm talking about in the knoll. There's a number of trees that are open grown with beautiful native oaks with this broad branching. And when we see that in the woods, we know that those trees grew in the wide open sun. So their branches reach out for light. So we're going to restore some of that, take away some of that competition and open that up, make for a much stronger, less eroding ground plane, and then we can get more pollinator species in there, and so it'll look somewhat more like the image on the right. Looking down at the existing Weber pond, the big difference between today and what we'll see at the end of this project is that the water level will be 4 feet below where it is today because of the pumping that will occur. That means on the east side and the south side, we really don't need to disturb that land at all. We pretty much can keep it the same. We lose some restoration of plant community and maybe removing diseased trees, but those neighbors will not be really impacted at all. On the west side, there's currently a thicket of trees running right through here. Of course, those will be removed. So at the end of the project, this will be really quite open through here, but you can see the intention is to plant many trees through that area. This area right here is where the pump station will be. There's a road that has to be built to allow access for maintenance vehicles. Our hope is, as we go into the next design phase, that this can become something more interesting and an amenity for people also. So this is what we think it will look like shortly after establishment of the initial plant community, with one exception, that we'll be planting many trees. This is a pond in Minneapolis with kind of the side slopes, a trail system, and the pond, that it will look similar to this afterwards, with the exception that we'll be planting many trees. Okay, so then looking at the park itself. So as we were looking at revising this park, updating the park, we were really thinking about the user groups. Those kids and athletes that are coming to use a recreational field, those adults and siblings and family members that are coming with them as spectators, and the kids and athletes themselves, what do they do in between games? We thought about the casual users, those that come to have a pickup game of soccer or ultimate frisbee, and then we thought about the walkers and the people that come to enjoy nature. So our goal was to accommodate all of those, and with the recreational fields, the two softball, baseball fields are pretty much where they are. This one on the south is shifted slightly to the west to accommodate the pond, but these are now of league standards in order to accommodate those league games. Another thing we're planning on doing is irrigating. So there's two different greens you can see on the grass here. Here's a lighter green of the areas that will not be irrigated, and the dark green where it can. And this really makes the areas of flooding where the ice rinks are. If you're out there today, you see that the grass is, at the end of the season, is struggling. If we can irrigate that, that'll be much quicker to recover, and we'll have a great field for recreation. So, and as an added benefit, we'll we're hoping to use the groundwater that is being pumped for a water source, a little sustainability aspect, in that we won't be using city water, but using this groundwater as a source of irrigation. Further looking at recreation, the biggest change is shifting the hockey rink from the center of the park to the side. This opens prime real estate in the middle. There's these gorgeous trees of maples and oaks that really are prime real estate for people to enjoy and recreate around. We have a park structure here, a park pavilion type structure with open space. We have a practice field here, which is really the size for kids, kind of t-ball size. The free skate is through that area also. And then the hockey rink is on the edge. It forms a really nice edge to the park that this interior space creates a very nice enclosure. We'll be using lighting that won't affect the neighborhood. It's also better access to the warming house. We also plan on making sure it looks really good from the street with trees and shrub plantings through that side. Around the existing park building, we're adding some pavement that will improve the programs. We have a space to the east of there, west of there rather. And then also we're doing some revisions to the parking lot to make that more efficient. We then have, like I said before, this swale running through with a trail. And the idea is to also bring nature into this recreational part of the park and create an interesting place for people to walk. We will, this kind of got obscured, but we'll definitely make a green connection through here with mowing. This is all still in design process, but we'll be figuring that out to make sure there's a good connection between the ball fields. So the yellowish color is that of pollinator plantings. The extent of that is yet to be determined, along with the number of trees, but we're hoping to wrap that around to the west side of the school in an area where it's really not used because of slopes. A great place for pollinator plantings. The school is here. The basketball court and playground is retained, as is the tennis court. Okay, I am now going to, getting close to the end here for my part, I'm going to show a couple renderings. One is from this area looking up the swale, and then the next one I'm going to show is down here looking up towards this pavilion. So here we are looking north at the pavilion. Here's that beautiful grove of trees that we would take advantage of for people to linger at. The ball fields in the background here. In the foreground, you'll see what we call nature play, where natural materials are used for kids to play on. We don't know exactly where we're going to put that yet, but something like that we expect to bring into the park. The next image is taken looking east off of Grimes Avenue, and here is the swale that moves through the park, the hockey rink, the t-ball, the park pavilion, and here's the basketball court. As you can see, the swale isn't a deep trench. It's very shallow and broad and really only about waist deep if you were to take the high point on the slides to the bottom. Planted with native vegetation and a lot of pollinator species along with it. Lastly, just a couple images of, this park pavilion could look something like this structure. And then with the nature play, yet to be determined, but using natural materials for providing opportunities for play. So with that, I hand it back to Ross.
Thank you, Fred. So I'm just going to wrap up here with a summary of some of the additional information that's in the staff report. I went through and I repeated the recommendation that we previewed for you in March and then finalized and you approved in April, just to make sure that we're truing up and we're really following through and tracking these commitments. So when it comes to the service, the process, the impacts and opportunities, I think we've shown here that we've met those commitments that we put out in the staff report. On the cost side, we are into a design process. You've already committed to at least $1.2 million in the design, and we are on our way, spending about 30% of that at our 30% design point, and we've aligned with the council strategy. On the recommended modifications to the modified recommendations, there was a real concern about the impacts at 41st Street during our design. You remember 41st Street right-of-way was potential for a box culvert that would provide an outlet to the Lynn and Kipling area, and that would be construction in close quarters with 4 homes. We're about 90% certain right now that we will not need that feature, and we can instead replace it with a expansion of the existing storm network and an extension of that storm network from the southeast side of the Lynn and Kipling inundation area and upsize that. That portion of the design is part of our street reconstruction piece of the design, so it's only at about the 10% level where we've just done some feasibility checks, but we're confident enough to say that we will remove that box culvert in the very good chance that we're able to feasibly engineer this alternative solution. The swale alignment through the park, the recommendation that we provided to you talked about a swale alignment on the north side. We did not like the results that was coming to, and the recommendation predicated the need for that swale on this box culvert in 41st Street. And I wanted to show you just kind of a demonstration of, that was my error. I connected one to the other, but the swale is still necessary for flood purposes because Grimes Avenue, the homes on Grimes, the school and the shelter would still all be potentially at risk if we did not include some sort of a flood control feature in the park. So an image will follow on the next one that kind of gives a little bit more from some of the modeling information that we provided. The budget, like I said, we are off and running. We know that the budget right now to deliver on that $10 million in capital, $2 million in professional service is feeling a little bit stretched right now when it comes to the contaminated and dredged materials. We've ordered some additional testing to make sure that we can really sharpen the pencil on that so that we're not removing or landfilling, paying that extra cost on materials that don't need it, but doing it where we do. And then just the general labor markets that we're seeing right now with everything short, long lead times really are keeping us working fast so that we can still deliver this project in 2022. We're also, I'll go over some recommendations on how we proceed delivering this project as part of 3 different sub-projects. So more on the next few slides on that too. So this is images from our 2D model that demonstrate why the swale is still necessary. So if you remember, we did 2-dimensional models and videos. These are all available on our engagement site where you can watch the 1%, 5%, 10%, 25% probability events kind of play out and see what our model is seeing. On the left image, this is in the minutes before you actually see floodwaters cascading through the...
Can you just orient us a little bit here,
Sure.
Mr. Bittner?
Yeah, so these are images, and the color gradation is depth, and the black hashes and lines are flow direction and velocity.
And
so
where are we on the park and the streets, just for folks?
Grimes Avenue is covered in water here on the west side.
Okay.
and then the park entrance and the park build shelter itself are kind of underneath this flood shape here. A Vale, is it Vale? A Vale Academy is the structure right over here.
And then France Avenue on the right.
France Avenue's on the right, right?
Great, thank you.
Yep. So at the 12-hour, 36-minute mark, this is before that cascade starts. I can get a laser pointer going here. So in this later point in the storm, at the 14-hour, 46 mark, you can see that there's the water cascading through the blocks. One of the real design goals that we're trying to eliminate. This is, again, the existing conditions model. That's where, you see both the park structure and the Avail Academy seeing the potential for flood exposure. This is in the moments before that when just the local flooding from Grimes is causing at least potential flood exposure for the park structure and then use of the Avail Academy property for emergency overflow. So we haven't done the if or but for the swale. We don't plan to do that analysis, but we at least wanted to demonstrate the change in the recommendation language that we're recommending for that. Moving on. So this was a zoom out of our schedule. The key here is the design process is continuing. We see this as the last check-in on architecture before we deliver you, essentially a bid to award. So we wanted to make sure we're on the right track and receive input or direction today. And then the build would begin in 2022. Again, this is the main strategy here is those two Morningside C, D, and E neighborhoods are up for reconstruction in 2022 and 23. The design gears are starting to whirl on all those, and we wanted to make sure that we're ahead of the game and we know what requirements for the stormwater that has to meet to extend the benefit of this project all the way up into the neighborhood. So this is a little closer look at from here out what those design points look like. We're seeing that this comment period is coming to an end. We're still wishing to hear from people, but as we move down that design funnel, the ability to move becomes either very expensive or not possible, so we wanted to make sure we're getting the voices and the checks in early. We're talking with our regulators to make sure that we're hitting all the risk and safety concerns, and we're moving into our final design work. We see delivering this as part of 3 projects. Awarding a tree clearing contract is part of one of those regulatory requirements. We want to make sure that birds, owls, bats, and the rest don't all move in the spring just to be moved out with a tree clearing. So we're recommending the removal of trees and awarding a tree clearing contract in the winter. And then awarding of a grading and park project in early spring. And potentially weeks after that, awarding of the neighborhood recon project, which includes the majority of the pipe project. So that would mean come next spring, construction would take over at least the south parts and the park parts of this neighborhood. And we'd hope to move through those within the construction year with with the street recon occupying 2023 in that red area.
Yeah, if you could just, on the map on the right, can you orient us vis-a-vis the park?
Yeah, so the project boundary between the street recons is 42nd Street, and then the eastern boundary is Grimes and Inglewood. The southern boundary is Branson, and I think this is Morningside Road.
Sure. So the Morningside D and E would be next year in 2022. So that would be, we'd be talking about that in December and then making awards in the winter.
That's
and
right.
then the C area, which is adjacent to the park, would be in 2023.
Correct.
Okay.
That's the end of my slide deck. Thanks for hearing us out, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bentner.
I'm also joined by Perry Vetter and Tom Swenson to help on the park side if we have questions that get into the park program.
Gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for being here. All right. Thanks for the presentation. Questions from the council? Member Jackson. lead us
I'll
off.
kick us off.
All right. Very good.
So for those of you who are coming new to the party, this all began in 2018. And I was on the Energy and Environment Commission at the time, and we were advised by both Jessica and Ross looking at models of climate change. And in Minnesota, climate change means wetter and more extreme weather. And so as the managers of water in Edina, they said, what are we going to do? So the city put together a flood mitigation task force. And what they learned was really shocking, that we're built on a swamp, essentially the entire city, and there's a lot of water in Edina. And as more and more water comes in more extreme storms, we're going to have to deal with that. And so the implication that this is people built on a floodplain, Morningside is the oldest neighborhood in Edina. It was first platted out in 1906. These homes have been there for a long time. They were not built on the floodplain when they were built. The floodplain has come to them. And this is really something that we're looking at some pretty serious flooding risk going forward. And so this has been something that the city has put a lot of time and effort into looking at how do we live in a time of climate change. And I do want to stress the word change. This is not an existing condition. This is something that's changing, and it's going to get worse. And so I know that all the team have put tremendous amount of time and effort into keeping our city safe and adapting to climate change. We can mitigate it in some terms, but we also have to adapt. So it has been very somber, the work of the city council leading up to this point, because this is a big deal. It's a big change, and it's an expensive change. And we're not doing it for cosmetic purposes. We're doing it to mitigate flood risk, a very real flood risk. And so, first of all, I want to thank everybody who's worked on this so far. I know I really appreciate the professionalism and passion that all the staff have brought to this, because it's a big deal, and it's going to be expensive, and it's going to be a big change. So that being said, I do want to, I have some questions. First, I want to thank the Morningside Neighborhood Association for their survey and their quick work on that. I found that very helpful, and it's really good to hear from the neighbors, and I thought that they asked a lot of good questions and really managed that well. So I appreciated that, and I want to say thank you. With the park redesign, I have some specific questions, and I have some process questions. The first one is about the hockey rink. One of the concerns that I heard is that it's awfully close to that sidewalk, and if kids are out playing hockey or people out playing hockey, pucks go flying. Is there a risk of somebody being hit by a flying hockey puck with the location of the rink there?
Maybe with a nod from Tom Swenson, we can figure out whether that's a plowed path or...
So we do have other rinks in town that have fencing or netting that can protect against pucks. So if that's a concern, it's something we could look into.
Okay, I want to make sure that I think that was one of the primary concerns of moving the rink, that it might be dangerous for people walking by. So thank you. I appreciate you looking into that. Let's see. I just have so many questions. One is on the Lynn Kipling dugout. Is that's going to have to be dredged out, correct, and then redesigned basically because it's gotten overgrown over time? Am I correct in that?
Right. Yeah. At the April meeting, we talked about nearly complete tree removal with the saving of several groves. So the design you saw there showed saving groves on the north and the south side of the pond. But generally, that whole space and the outlet elevation is lowered by several feet. Okay. So it is some extensive excavation there.
Okay. So in relation to that, where the water is going to be temporarily there, one of the concerns that was raised is if we're going to have stagnant water sitting around in places that's going to be scummy and filled with mosquitoes and stuff. Is mitigating that part of the design of what's going on, I think, in this area and then also in the Weber Pond area?
Sure. Thank you for the question. One of the things that we've been learning about is in the preliminary design piece is the extent to groundwater and its impact here. So right now, if you walk out to the Lynn Kipling inundation area, you see kind of a constant and steady but small flow where there's groundwater flowing into this. And it's pretty much the only source of water for this right now. We see the potential for that groundwater flow to increase slightly, and we're proposing the routing of stormwater from west to east and from northwest to northeast as the main flow, and then northwest to southeast as the high flow. So there will be flow through this on a much smaller storm. Small storms right now remain in the pipe that just head right by this and don't affect this at all. So to that extent, we're going to see some good flow through. I think we heard that flow through again tonight. What is the water quality of these spaces going to look like? I think, they're getting bigger. There's more water per urban area, so it's a little bit nuanced. We see that initial maintenance action where you take out and you remove down to mineral soils as a potentially very good water quality in the first couple of years. But then they will find their equilibrium point with stormwater. So it's not a panacea. It's not perfect for clean water in the long term, but we do have options for management of those.
Okay, great. Because I think, once it's done, it's nice to, one of the goals is to have the minimum amount of maintenance needed over time. So I'm glad that you're thinking about that. We met with some of the neighbors that are on the easement between Grimes and Crocker. I want to just clarify or state back in my words what you said, and that is that we won't have to be digging up their yards and that the 42nd Street piping will be sufficient. That there'll be some changes to the piping, but it won't be the drastic landscape removal that we were looking at before. Is that correct?
That's correct, but right now we're only at about a 90% certainty level that we will be able to avoid it, so 10% chance that we would still have to utilize that. So we're going to know more about that as the pipe portion of the project starts to get up to speed.
Okay.
And the way I've changed it in the recommendation is a box culvert along 41st Street will only be used if a 42nd Street pipe cannot feasibly be upsized to accommodate the additional flows. So I kind of revised that recommendation to state our preference that we would like to avoid that if we can.
Okay, excellent. I know that those homeowners were very upset about the disruption. And so I appreciate the staff's work to try to minimize that disruption because it's very upsetting. So let's see. This is both for Manager Neal and for staff, and that is about the process of the master plan for Weber Park. And I think a lot of people were surprised because we had been talking about having a master plan for the park, and now it's kind of rolling forward without that and without the process that a master plan would have gone through. So if we can kind of talk about how that process is shortcutted, or is it postponed, or where are we at on that process of a master plan for the area?
Councilmember Jackson, members of council, when we acquired this property in 2015, is that 15 or 16? There was a pledge made at that time that we would be acquiring this property for future park open space uses. Specifically, we talked about stormwater protection and also dog park. We also talked about the idea that we would do planning in that area jointly with St. Louis Park. And so because the land is, it is adjoining and it integrates in many ways. So we've over the years have kind of gone back and forth about we're ready to plan it, they weren't ready to plan it. They were ready to plan it, we weren't ready to plan it. When we have stacked the master planning up for this particular park, we really put it in a queue behind a number of other parks that were existing at the time. So instead of building something new or even planning something new, we put most of our energy behind parks in existing neighborhoods that had bigger playing areas and wanted more investment. So that's what we did with our existing parks and try to put this in the queue. It just didn't get up to the same level as some of our existing parks. So we knew we were going to use it for this was going to be one of the purposes someday, and that brings us to where we are today.
So with the idea that there will not be a master plan in the future then, or just for the shared areas with the adjacent areas with St. Louis Park, or where does this leave us with our options for future development of this park?
I can say we haven't had that discussion yet with St. Louis Park.
Okay. There's some room for work, but a lot of it's going to be done. The Edina portion of it will be done with this. Okay. Thank you. So I have a couple of small things. One with the design, we have a boardwalk trail on the 9 Mile Creek Trail that's, I hope that you'll look at that with the design things. That's our neighborhood, and it's really a lovely part, or a lovely trail, and I kind of like the idea of an Edina style. And similarly, our Braemar Golf Course recently went under a great redesign, and Oak Savannah was a part of that, so that I hope that you can take some cues from the work that's already been done. Because like I said, we like to see an Edina style, so thank you. And one additional thing is, when we're doing the parking lot, if we can do permeable paving to any extent, I would appreciate that as well. Again, moving that water out instead of putting pervious surfaces. I think I had so much. Let me make sure I've got everything here. That is, and I appreciate you keeping the public comment period open a little bit longer. That's really important. I think people were concerned that it came in. I know we've got a tight time frame with the road reconstruction coming up, but we do want to make sure that people are heard. So those are my comments. Thank you, Your Honor.
Other questions or discussion? Member Pierce?
Thank you, Your Honor. I just a couple of comments. This is a really hard project, and I think the recognition of that is warranted both on behalf of the staff and the community. I can imagine if I were an engineer, I would love to work on something like this, the complexity of it, and then when you throw in the emotional impact and the emotional equity from the community, it just makes it even more challenging to do the work that you're doing. And so I just want to applaud the team for that. And my general comment, I think we can see and understand the benefit and the need here. And so I thank Member Jackson for giving us the historical perspective just to kind of ground everyone. But even with that, there is still a lot of feedback where there's this sense of loss. There's a sense of loss of nature, a sense of loss of the openness of the area today. And so we get a lot of feedback about neighbors feeling like they're not going to have the same experience walking in nature and walking their dogs and things like that. And so I wanted to make two comments about that. One, I think you did a good job of recognizing that feedback and trying to figure out a way to acknowledge, honor that feeling of loss, and really trying to design, not necessarily design around it, but design with that in mind. And so I would encourage you to keep doing that as often as we can, listening to the neighbors, but reminding everyone of the reason we're doing this, so that you have both the recognition of the need as well as understanding the feedback and the sense of loss. I like the idea of looking at 9 Mile Creek, right? In some of your renderings, that it gave me that sense as I looked at some of the renderings. So I thought that that was good. One simple question, I'll give you a softball one. The outfield fence. So there was feedback that said don't put the fence, that barrier behind the outfield. And so that's still in the plan. And so I just wondered why the need for that the fence for the outfield.
I'm going to invite Tom Swenson up to talk. We were reacting to a request from our Parks group.
Yeah, so the fence has a couple purposes. One is for league games, to have exactly 200 feet from the home plate to the fence. Works for some softball leagues to play their games.
Okay.
Also, with the swale being built through there with the walking trail, it'll separate the balls from being in play on the field versus rolling down into the walking trail in the swale area. It'll just keep baseball and softball play in one local area.
That's it. Thank you. And the last, I guess, suggestion or recommendation, I do often feel like that sense of loss is because it's difficult for us to just imagine, given where we are today, what tomorrow is going to look like and how I might interact with whatever the future happens to be. And renderings don't quite get us there all the time, right? And so I don't know if there's a way to really help people be able to understand how they're going to interact with this new park. But I would encourage us to try to figure out a way that we're able to give people a sense of how the new environment is going to be utilized, rather than just looking at renderings. Renderings sometimes come across as kind of the pretty, if you will, right? The extreme that never really comes to fruition. So if we can find a way to help residents really feel like how they might engage in the new environment, I think that'll go a long way in helping us to be able to close the loop and move forward.
Thank you, Member Pierce. Member Anderson?
Thank you, Your Honor. I think Member Pierce has cut to the chase on what at least our audience here tonight and many people watching this have on their minds. And that is really just, Member Pierce calls it a sense of loss. I guess there's a sense of pain that comes with transition. And what the feedback that we have received is along the lines of the kind of the counterintuitive concept of having water problems and removing trees on a objective basis. We know that's not the case. We know that they have to come down in order to address our stormwater issue there. So there's a lot of content here this evening. And the content is tremendous. Objectively, you look at the plan and say, this is a really good plan, and at the end of it, there'll be a great facility, and we are protecting the safety and welfare of many residents. And that's one of the things that we need to concern ourselves with all the time. As a matter of fact, with virtually every single project that is proposed, the council considers what is the impact, ecological impact, and what are our stormwater mitigation issues that relate to any given project that we consider. But subjectively, we really are dealing with, I think, the pain of losing what we're familiar with, and the commune with nature that's achieved by many, and the transition in neighborhoods, and the stress of the construction around it. And all those things are real. People come by their feelings naturally. And so as we deal with those things going forward, I think that the things that we consider here are often very difficult because there are good points made on either side. We know that we have to move ahead with this. We know we do. And yet, I guess the last remaining question that I have is, as you planned it, as you went through it, are there any modifications or changes that you saw as possible that might lessen impact? And which I think, and everybody's been asking the same types of questions in different ways. Is there anything that you think that you could do differently today that would make the project more acceptable or lessen impact? The plan itself is good. I look at it and say, this is a good plan. Are there other things that you could do? Maybe. And I guess that's my question, though, Mr. Bentner.
Thank you, Councilmember Anderson. That's kind of the nut of a lot of the conversations that I'm having with people. And what I express to them is, the design team is trying to, hit the target as defined by, everybody. And we want to make sure that, to me, the ultimate goal is to make sure the process builds the trust. So when we are taking a different position, or when we are making a trade-off, when there's a trade-off, we want to be forthright and describe it. So some of the questions around the nature of the space, how much, a lot of that is, we've pulled out all the tricks to really get that water and get the flood benefit out of as little space as possible. And you can see that even compared to some of those concept designs, we've really tried to save some of the taller stands of trees around the natural area. But aside from those small value engineering, those little optimizations where we save another tree, I'm not seeing the one thing I could do to hit that target a little closer, unless we were willing to sacrifice the initial project goals and dial the project down and accept less flood risk reduction. So I'm not, that's not on the table for me. I'm working under the scope of service and the direction that was approved at council in April. And I'm also working under the scope of the public engagement, where the scope of the public engagement was limited to aesthetic choices, not to the overall plan of action or the strategy that we're employing or the level that we're employing it at. So those are decisions that I take as foregone. And you wouldn't all have set me down on a path to spend $1.2 million to design if we weren't committed to taking down at least 6 acres of trees in Weber Woods, because that was on the menu there. And we knew that that was going to be, we might be able to dial that back, but it's not going to be to 4. It might be to 5.9. It's a minor. It changes now.
Thank you for your succinct response. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Anderson. So I guess I would echo a lot of the thoughts of my colleagues. The word that comes to mind for me, you used it a minute ago, Mr. Bentner, and Ms. Wilson used it earlier, is trade-offs. I mean, it's really, we've got two goods here. We've got a park that people love, and we've got a stormwater issue that we have to manage. And so how do we do our best with both without sacrificing either of them? One thing that comes to mind for me is, as you look at the map of the proposed configuration, I suppose if you were just after flood management, you could dig in a bigger pond in the Weber Woods. You could take the whole Weber Woods with water to create even more. And we haven't done that because I think you're trying to strike this balance where you've got both. And so I think this is challenging, and I appreciate Member Pierce's comments about how this is, when you got a place that you really like. We run into this all the time in Edina. We love our community, and so when we think about changing it, it just feels like it's going to be lost when we're going to change. So I think I think you've struck some good balances here. I am also joining my colleagues in encouraging you to continue to listen to the community and try to divine what the right answers are there. There's a lot of good questions and a lot of good observations from the experts in the neighborhood, and I hope that we continue to do that. So, does that spark any questions or comments from my colleagues in addition? All right, is there anything else? We don't have a decision to make tonight. You were looking for some guidance from us or comments and discussion. I think we've provided that. Is there anything else you need?
No, thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Anderson.
Your Honor, thank you. I guess the only question I have is really one more as a matter of protocol or procedure. There is no public hearing scheduled on this matter. And it doesn't, I guess, on the face of it, by Robert's rules, we wouldn't necessarily have one. Is there a reason to consider that, to hear more from the public? I'm just wondering how you feel about that.
Councilmember Anderson, members of council, we oftentimes tell you that public hearings are near the bottom in terms of effectiveness of ways the public can communicate to you because of the restrictions of time, format, all kinds of different environmental impacts on the ability to speak to you and let you know their feelings. I think it isn't helpful, frankly, in resolving the kind of complex issues that you have here tonight. People have many different ways. They can call you, they can email you, they can use the city government as an intermediary. They can do it without using us as an intermediary. I don't think that a public hearing necessarily will be helpful in communicating concerns to you. And we have our practices that we don't schedule them unless there is a statutory reason for scheduling them. That's been our practice, and we would like to continue that to be our practice, but we understand that you will make the final call on this.
Thank you. That's clarifying. Thank you.
So,
Member Jackson.
Thank you, Your Honor. So just to follow up on that, though, I have been receiving a lot of emails from people who I have no idea where they live. And the public hearing process and the Better Together process both require an address to be put in, which is an extremely important element of information for me. So it's one thing for someone to say, my home is at risk of flooding, and these are my comments, and someone to say, I use this park once or twice a year, but I don't want you to change it. And they don't live in the community, they're not at risk of the flooding. So I guess, I don't know how quite to square that circle, but I just want to tell the public that without an address, the information is a lot less useful for me. So to use Better Together or to include an address is really important, because we do have to protect the people in our community, and that's what our job is, to keep people safe. And I want to know where the point of view is coming from.
Agreed.
I would add, the question I would have is, what have we told people we are going to do? One of the things that we have talked about in our continuing efforts to refine our community engagement process is that we should tell people what we're going to do, we should follow through and do what we said we were going to do, and then tell them what we did as a result of that. And I know, the presentation tonight had a bunch of material about, here were comments we received, here's what we did, here's what we didn't do, here's why. Did we, as this process opened up, talk about a public hearing in the process or not, and how did that fit in? If anybody can answer that.
I'll defer to Mr. Milner on that question about what we've told people already.
Yeah, I think we came to you in April, and we laid out a public participation plan. And as Mr. Bittner and Ms. Wilson clarified tonight, they followed the plan that we presented to you, and that's exactly what we've been doing since April. And I would say we've been gathering feedback even before that as part of the flood risk strategy, but maybe Jessica can speak a little bit more to that.
Yeah, and in our public participation plan, the one that was approved in April of 2021 for this phase of the project, We made a promise to share the 30% design and to hear people out and get their reactions from that, and then to share it with you. We did not make a promise to have a public hearing in that public participation plan.
Because I think one of the things that we've discovered as we've been working on this is people who participate have an expectation that early is as good as late, that, you know, when they're asked, they'll get their feedback will be heard. And I think we just have to be careful about how if we change course in the middle of a process, there's going to be some folks who thought they were heard earlier who either will miss the second round or not have an opportunity to get back into it, or think that their contributions are not valued as much if we've changed course. So I understand the desire to have a public hearing, but I think that it doesn't mean that we're not hearing from people if we don't have a public hearing. And we've heard a lot of comments from folks, and we'll continue, I assume, to hear more. So, any other thoughts? Member Pierce.
Thank you. So I think you kind of hit where I was thinking. If residents feel like they have not been heard and there aren't adequate forums for them to be heard, then I do think we have an issue. I'm not sensing that in what we've seen today. I think the staff has demonstrated incorporating feedback, and I think they've done a nice job of that. However, just being completely transparent, if we brought to a vote whether or not we would have a public hearing, I would not vote against that, because it would make me feel as though I'm saying I don't want to hear feedback from the public. And that certainly is not the case, right? We definitely want engagement from the public. But again, just being completely honest, if we brought that to a vote, I would vote for a public hearing. And I agree with everything that Manager Neal just said. I personally believe public hearings are the least effective in terms of getting engagement with the community and helping improve the project process. I think there are other methods that are more beneficial, but I would never vote against not having one, because it does make me feel like we'd be saying we don't want to hear the public's feedback. And then the other thing I would say, and I guess that's why we record these, this project is moving forward. And so to me, that's just another example of when I think about what's the benefit of a public hearing. This project is going to move forward. There's a public benefit for it. And I believe the staff is doing a good job of hearing feedback and trying to strike that balance, like we said. I use the term loss. Member Anderson, I wrote down that loss causes pain. And in most cases, when we work together, we work through that pain, we find the balance, we try to strike the right balance to provide the benefit that is needed. But at the end of the day, I personally feel like this project is going to move forward, and I don't see the value of that a public hearing would bring additional benefit to the staff to improve the project. I think there are other methods that we could utilize to get that input.
Well said. Any other comments? All right, with that, let's move on to the next agenda item. All right, next up is resolution number 2021-79, approving modification in number 4 to the Southdale TIF district.
You want to take it back? Right? There we go.
Are you ready?
Oh, and all the people left.
Mr. Neuendorf.
Yes, thank you. Good evening. I'm Bill Neuendorf, the city's Economic Development Manager. Here this evening to discuss the resolution 2021-79. This is a resolution that would seek to modify the Southdale 2 TIF plan. This would be the 4th modification of that plan over the last 8 years or so. The modification document was prepared by Ellers, our public financial consultants. It was made available, distributed to all the agencies and parties. We conducted a public hearing on September 9th and also received additional public input on the Better Together website. On the website, we only received one comment, which I think was the same comment we looked at the public hearing date. So this evening, there's no new information. The modification is the same as it was presented to you back on the 9th. And staff, as we did a few weeks ago, we still recommend that the modification be approved. I'm available this evening if you have any questions, and happy to listen and encourage your action this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Neuendorf. Questions for Mr. Neuendorf? Member Anderson.
Thank you. I do have questions, and there may only just be one answer. I'm not certain. So I'm taking a look at the budget modification, and so there is we can see how it was modified on December 17th of 2019. The September 9th you presented on that, I think that was 2 weeks ago. And so as these numbers shift and change around, I'm not certain and couldn't find a line item explanation of the intention of the movement. I just see that we have additional expenses. They total about 3 million, just under 3 million more than in December of 2019. And so I was uncertain whether this is simply I guess I'd call it a reconciliation of expenses that were taken past 2019, or are there some of these line items that are intended as future expenses that we are budgeting for now, or is there a combination?
Yes, so the TIF plan is a forward-looking budget. So at this point, as of December of 2019, the maximum possible expenditures would have been around 31 million. Based on the current market valuations in that TIF district, as well as some changes in state law this summer, we're able to look at not the past value, but the current value. And that's where the additional $3 million comes in. So the amended budget would maximize the total expenditure, expenses today and in the future. It would increase that maximum possible from 31 to 33 million. So that those dollars have not all been spent yet, but that would essentially be the spending cap, again, if we choose to spend that much money.
Okay, so when you reference the spending path, for instance, other qualifying improvements moved from $5 to $6 million. So post 2019, we have $1 million of further improvements. Where would those be? I just can't find them anywhere.
Sure. And at this point, the specific improvements have not been identified. That's why there's no detail. So the layout of this form is something that's mandated by the state auditor's office. They give us 6 different spending categories. The biggest one is typically other. And that could include any other type of legitimate expenditure. So for this particular district, it was The biggest expense in that category was the initial loan to Simon Properties for the mall. But at this point, there's no list of specific expenditures beyond that. So as we updated the budget, it was simply a matter of increasing each of the line items a little bit to equal that maximum of 33.9. When it comes to the state auditor's reports, the dollar amounts that are expended are not, they don't necessarily have to be in the same category. It just cannot exceed the total. So there's really not a good point why that went from 5 to 6 million. It could have stayed by 5, and then we would have just inflated a different line item by that extra $1 million. We're just trying to make the numbers balance in the spending plan.
Okay, so we decertified this district in December, I believe. Yeah. So we have essentially, we've got 3 months. Or maybe you could explain this to me. I know Mr. Antut's floating around in the stratosphere, but I'm just curious. I guess I just don't understand how when we come down to December 31st, do these dollars have to be spent by that time, or do they simply need to be allocated?
So the dollars do not need to be spent by December 31st, but that's when we stop collecting. So effective at the end of this year, we'll stop TIF collections. So property tax dollars collected in 2022 will no longer be put into that TIF account. They'll go to all the other taxing bodies like they normally would. So we have typically up until it's 9 months after the date, so we have until about August, end of August of next year, to actually spend the monies or to commit the monies. This is where it gets a little bit more convoluted. But I also mentioned that there was a change in state law this year, and that's what we have in mind as we're making this modification. So the recent change in TIF law said that if there's funds available, if a city so chooses, they could redirect some of those funds that are available and otherwise not allocated yet to a qualifying project. So later this fall, we'll be asking you to consider a spending plan to direct some of those other unallocated dollars to good projects. At this point, the majority, if you look at the largest line item in the expense category, is the construction of affordable housing. So far we've used a lot of the dollars out of this district to support affordable housing, and we would expect that to continue, although some of these changes in state law allow it to be used for other redevelopment projects. So that's what we have in mind as we try to close out this budget. But the short answer is the dollars do not have to be spent by the end of the year, but that's the date that we stop collecting. And then we make choices about whether or not we want to, how we want to handle those remaining funds.
And you'll present the spending plan before the year end?
By the end of the year.
Okay, now I understand. Okay, thank you. Now, is that essentially, does that affect in any way at all the distribution we discussed? Well, that's coming next. Let me ask that question in the next item. So thank you.
Other questions? All right. Seeing no further questions, I'd entertain a motion.
I will move Resolution 2021-79.
Second.
I have a motion by Member Jackson, a second by Member Pierce. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Neuendorf. Next up is resolution number 2021-77, adopting the proposed budget and establishing the proposed tax levy payable in 2022. Mr. Neal will present on this.
Thank you, Your Honor, members of council. We have a presentation for you tonight on item E. This is the the action for the City Council to certify the preliminary property tax levy for payable 2022. This is an action we need the council to take tonight. We have to certify this before the end of the month, and this is our last regular council member meeting to do that. We do have a brief PowerPoint presentation we want to share with you tonight, and if we could call that up. I think Alicia's they're going to do it from over there, Jen? Yep.
So while that's getting queued up, this is not the final adoption of the levy. This is a not to exceed preliminary approval, correct?
Thank you, Your Honor. That's an important item to consider. In Minnesota property tax system for local governments, we are all required to adopt a preliminary levy about this time of year. This preliminary levy is a property tax levy that we will not exceed. So our final levy decision, which we'll make sometime around the beginning or end of December, may be up to, but it may be beneath or up to this top number. This number, however, is the number that is used to compute the property tax payable statement that residents and property taxpayers will receive after, right after the elections. Actually, in mid-November, they begin to receive those numbers, and that's typically a time when you will begin to hear from property taxpayers about that, because they get that bill and they have questions about it or they have feelings about it, and that's generally when you begin to hear about that.
And that's in advance of our Truth and Taxation
hearing
in early December, and then the adoption of the final budget before the end of the calendar year.
So you adopt a preliminary levy. That levy is used to compute a property tax statement, which tells residents sort of the worst case scenario. They use that knowledge of the worst case scenario to tell you how they feel about it. And then you have a chance to make a final decision on that property tax levy before the end of December. And you can leave it where it is, you can decrease it.
Right, and I know
you just can't go over this number.
In your staff memo, there were some dollars that you indicated you were going to be wrestling with over the next couple of months as you try to arrive at that final budget.
So when we had the last time,
have I tap danced long enough?
Yeah, thank you. I think we're ready for the show.
I didn't know I was famous.
Are we ready? Great. Alicia McAndrews, our new finance director, is going to lead off this presentation. Alicia.
Thank you. Good evening, Acting Mayor and members of the council. My name is Alicia McAndrews, Finance Director. I know we've met before. Happy to be here today to talk about the preliminary levy in the 2022-23 biennial budget. In front of you, you'll see our agenda. I think this should look familiar to you. Some of these slides we've shared with you before. But again, tonight we'll be covering the proposed budget, the process and timeline, which is set to comply with the state statute that Scott mentioned. We'll also then dive into more detail about the preliminary budget, the proposed levies, some tax comparisons, and then leave time for questions. I'll just also mention that there is additional detail in your member packets for this evening, additional financial schedules, if you would like to reference that at any point. The next slide we have here, the total City of Edina consolidated budget. So these are all of the funding sources that are used to run the city and its facilities. Starting at the right, our internal service funds, which function as a chargeback mechanism to allocate central service costs to the different departments. In the middle, we have our enterprise funds for the city services that operate more like enterprises. And then on the left, we have our governmental funds. And this is where we'll be focusing most of our time today, particularly the general fund, which funds most of the city's operating budget. Then moving on to the next slide, I think just before we wanted to dive deeper into the proposed budget, we wanted to provide a little context and data on the city's tax base. So as you can see, Edina's estimated market value has been steadily increasing, and in 2022 is estimated at $13.8 billion. which is a 3.7% increase over 2021. Residential and commercial redevelopment has contributed to the increase with approximately $211 million in 2022 of new construction. Moving on to the next slide, just a bit more detail on the timelines that I mentioned. Right in the middle, the highlighted, you'll see that's where we are today. And looking forward then, we'll continue to refine the numbers, as Scott said, and take your feedback today. And we have council work sessions in October and November. And then at the December 7th meeting will be the public hearing. And the last final day to possibly adopt the budget would be December 21st. And then just a bit more detail on our biennial budget process. It's a quick snapshot. The even-numbered year is the first year of the biennium and is the year in which the capital improvement plan is reviewed and approved. And then in the second year, or the odd year, the 2022-23 operating budget is approved along with the CIP levy. So that is it for me, and I'll turn it over to Lisa, who'll talk more about strategy and work plans.
All right, thank you. As you can see, our 2-year budget work plan and operating budget fits within a much larger overall plan that starts with our strategic policy. So really, we have had a long history here of doing the 2-year budget work plan and operating budget together. And what that does is ensure that we have the resources and the tools and the staff and the time to be able to accomplish the projects that we commit to. So when we look at really the 2-year budget work plan and the operating budget, that's where we take the strategy and figure out how to implement that into action for the next 2 years. Our budget work plans really feed all of our other work plans. So one of the things that I like to sort of remind all of our staff on a regular basis too is that when we look at our department work plans, we're really looking at what are those one-time projects or what we would consider to be sort of the discretionary, even though at times they're not discretionary. But the vast majority of our work as a city is really in the day-to-day. So it's 80% of the work we do is really making sure that we're responding to the police and fire calls. We're making sure that people have clean water, the streets are plowed. And when we're looking at the budget work plan and the department work plans, we're looking at what are those other things that we want to accomplish in the next 2 years in addition to those day-to-day operations. So the budget work plan proposal that is included in your packet right now is the exact same draft that you saw in your August session. The next time that you will see the budget work plan draft will be in the October 19th session. And at that point, what you'll see is a much shorter and more concise budget work plan than you're seeing today. So we're still organizing the budget work plan in the same way where we have the broad goals recently people have been referring to them as pillars. So we're looking at adopting that language, but taking a look at what are those things that we can now transfer to department work plans and what are the things where we need to continue at the council level for the council to be involved in the next 2 years. So we have been working on changes. We've been looking at the feedback that you've given during the retreat and since then, which really is looking at changing a lot of the language and making it more concise and making it more visionary, especially as it relates to the strong foundation. Typically, the strong foundation work plan item or goal item is our much largest, heaviest area of the work plan. I think if you want to move to the next slide here. And so we're looking at really kind of trying to restructure that so it's a little bit easier to read and digest. And so right now it's organized into infrastructure, facilities, and tools, which would be the technology and equipment. So there's not anything new on here from what you saw in August. But like I said, over the next month or so, you'll continue to see more of those items get pushed to department work plans so we can start to focus on what does council really want to focus on over the next 2 years. On reliable service, I think that no new changes there. We haven't talked a lot about some of the updates in this area that we'll want to do post-pandemic related to reviewing our remote work, reassessing the City Hall space needs study, which a lot of what we learned during that process was really moving towards services more off-site and more gathering spaces for the public as well. So refreshing that and making sure that it still meets our needs post-pandemic. And then the increasing resources for mental health calls. On the livable city, one of the things that has been added really since the discussions about ARPA have come into play is exploring ways that city can incent the expansion of fiber optic to the public. So that's an area that we'll continue to talk about and have that on the proposed work plan as that moves forward as well. And then finally, Better Together. Again, no changes from last time. One of the things also we haven't talked about as much over the last month or so has been an addition of ensuring the successful implementation of the ARPA funding.
So this is the proposed 2022-2023 budget from the general fund from a total tax levy standpoint. This is largely as you've seen it in the past with one exception. Well, let me note two things. One, that we are excluding the special street levy from this particular graphic, and we'll show you what it looks like when we add that back in, of course, because it is a property tax levy as well. But we have had, over the last couple of weeks, as we've been working through some staffing questions, some kind of a realization that we needed to add for about $450,000 to our proposed levy for 2022, based on a commitment we made to staff our fire department. We have made some changes in the way that we receive some state shared revenue from the state of Minnesota, particularly for firefighter pensions. We are recommitting that money to staffing, adding to the staffing levels of our fire department. And we have to work out the details of whether that money comes to us in 2022 or 2023. And how we do that depends on how we work with the state and how we work with Mrpa. But we are committed to doing that, and that's the biggest change that we're showing you that are incorporated in the numbers tonight. We think that we're going to figure out how to do that before we bring this back to you for a final action in December. And we think we can bring the levy back to you at a level that was much closer to what we showed you in August than it is tonight. But we are asking us for I think for your support to secure that number, at least for a couple more months, as we give ourselves some time to figure out the bottom line. The next graphic is what happens when we add the special street assessment in. So the special street the special street levy is our first step in moving away from the special assessment system, which will be a tremendous benefit for residents who are in the future, right, or living on a street in the future. That's going to be part of our neighborhood reconstruction program. We're going to see benefits from that. More people will see more benefit from that every year as we move forward for the next 15 years before we finally fulfill that promise. So this is what we are looking at tonight. It's an 8.98% increase for 2022, 5.71. We think that we can bring that number much closer back to the closer to the 7.9 total. Which is the total between the special street levy and the proposed general fund operations levy that we showed you in August. So we are continuing to work through some staffing discussions. Some of the complications of our staffing discussions this year are both resources and opportunities. We have more federal money coming into our coffers than we've ever had, and we need to try to make the best use of that as possible. We want to be careful that we don't use one-time money for ongoing commitments like staffing, but at the same time, if we have the opportunity to take advantage of some of the federal funds and some of our own funds that we were able to secure during the pandemic of last year. We want to be able to use that money wisely for the public, both current taxpayers and taxpayers in the near future. So we are continuing to work through some of these, both general fund positions and non-general fund positions, like we see in public works and in our utilities. This is just some of the background we've shared before about what makes up an 8.98 proposed tax levy, and 6.72 on the operations side and 2.26 on the special street levy side. Increased capital funding. I think this is a small screen with big numbers, but I think it reflects a priority that the council established in a previous budget cycle, where we are securing money now that really are from retired debt levies in the future. We were collecting and budgeting into our CIP system in 2019 $300,000 a year. $300,000 a year buys you about half a park in our system. Clearly not adequate in terms of reinvesting into public facilities in the community. In the space of 2 years, we've been able to grow that $300,000 to $2 million a year. So that money will continue to come into our system, and it will be available to the City Council to allocate towards a number of public facility projects in the future. And this is a little bit about what it costs, what the impact is. So in 2021, the median single-family home, which was valued at $551,000, was paying about $135 a month in property taxes to fund all city services, all police, fire, parks and recs, streets, etc. $135 a month. Total EMV, estimated market value, is increasing for 2022, so that median single-family home is now $571,800. The 8.98% property tax that we're proposing really breaks down into $97 increase per year, so $8 a month on the median single-family home. The Southdale 2 TIF district, we talked a little bit about this in previous discussions as well, but I think it's worth noting that this is the benefit to all property taxpayers in the city in terms of what that property tax base addition has been from the Southdale 2 TIF district area to our entire TIF district. It's made a huge difference in what we're able to do with our property taxes and our proposed property tax rate burdens. This is a little bit about our HRA levy. We've secured the HRA levy and set the HRA levy at our previous meeting. Median single-family home, so the green, this is property taxes on the city. It's median single-family home. We show you what the value of that home is on the numbers below. The green is just the city tax rate. The total tax rate is the upper line that goes from $5,400 to $7,200. Again, we mentioned earlier, we're going to certify a preliminary property tax levy tonight. We will continue to refine our budget, both the inputs and the outputs, which is what we typically do for a 2-year budget period. We'll have another discussion with council on October 19th. We'll have our public hearing on December 7th. If there's, we could take action that night, but more likely we'll take final action, the council will take final action on December 21st. We are happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Manager Neal. Questions?
Actually, thank you, Your Honor. My questions were answered in your presentation, so thanks for that.
Member Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. So I think we covered this last time. I've got a couple of questions, but the first one I think we covered before, but I do want to include in the engagement part of, it was on page 7 of the budget work plan, not on here, and that is to engage specifically apartment dwellers. I hope that that's part of the work plan. I just wanted to stress that again, because when we did the commission screening, we had very few people from apartments step forward. Another budget item that came up since we last looked at this is we had the presentation on snow plowing. And I know I am extremely proud of our snow plowing efforts here in the city of Edina, but one thing I learned is it's very expensive and very staff intensive. So I would like to at least have some awareness of what that cost is. So we're #1 in the country. We have been for a number of years, but it does cost money. And I'd like to see information about what that cost is, and so that people know, what it costs to maintain that quality. Again, one other thing that has come up recently is I think in our last PUD discussion, the developer said that he was going to be subcontracting with women and minority-owned businesses. And I don't believe that we're doing that currently as a city. And I don't know how that feeds into the budgeting process, but if it is part of the budgeting process, I think that's an issue I'd like to have looked at and part of the work plan for establishing whether we can do that or not. I think those are primarily my budget questions. I do have a handful of people who regularly contact me and say, why do you keep raising my taxes? Or I had somebody answer the phone, how are you going to raise my taxes today? So people are watching, and there are concerns. I guess there was one other question, and that is, does this proposed budget include for the, I know we have several pots of money, but does it include staffing increases in the pot of money that comes from property taxes?
It does. It includes right now a block of money that will be associated with staff increases. And the reason I'm being as vague as I am with that is that we still are considering a number of different staffing changes, some increases, and some changes in current part-time positions as well. Some of those positions are within departments that are paid exclusively from the general fund. Some of them are paid through support services, which are mostly from general fund, but also from other funds, like our utilities and some of our park and rec enterprises. Some of them are paid from outside of those funds even, so they're from utilities or from franchise fees or something like that. To the extent that we can figure out how to pay legitimately, how to pay staff from non-general fund departments, that helps to reduce the tax burden on residents. So that's why we're continuing to look at how we do this, because how we do it is as important as what we're doing with it.
Okay, thank you. And I do, as we are adding staff and things like that, I would like to be able to articulate to the public what services, because we have high expectation of services in this city, but I know it comes at a cost. And so I'd like to be able to say, well, if you want that, it's going to cost, and this is what it's going to cost. Or when people are complaining about their taxes, yes, but these are the outstanding services that we're getting. And I look over at Chief Milburn, and I know that we've got outstanding police officers. And that comes at a cost that we want. It's like the teachers in the school system. Really good teachers, really good police officers, good staff cost money. And I'm happy to pay that, but I do want to be able to articulate that to the public.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a good example too, is one of the positions that we're taking a really hard look at this year is the Assistant City Forester position. One of the clear political priorities, community priorities of the City Council and all of the boards and commissions we have is do more with tree protection, tree preservation. And so we've adopted revised tree ordinances and other practices that really put the city in a much more forward position with regards to arborists and forestry and tree management. That's requiring us probably to have another staff person that's involved in that process. Otherwise, construction and other tree protection suffers because we're not able to enforce our regulations. So it's a good example of how your priorities really make an impact on our budgeting process.
All right, thank you very much. Thanks.
Could you pull up slide 17? Yeah, so I think this one always helps me to understand where we're at and how we're getting there. Member Jackson's question about wage increases, benefit increases. So for me, the piece that I'm interested in learning more about between now and December 7th is the service level changes, internal service fund changes, and all other changes. Because when I look at the budget, I think about where are the places where we can make some, where we ought to look to avoid increases. Some of these things, our commitment to our staff and to providing services is one that we have to live up to. The street levy is something that we've made a decision about after a lot of excellent work. And the equipment levy and the HRA levy are things that we have kind of tried to, they're efforts over time to try to achieve some goals that are really important. So, and I understand the employee compensation and the wage increases and retaining good people, which is what you have to do. So I'd be interested as we go forward in learning more about the service level changes, internal service fund charges, and all other changes, because that's a big category with that 3%.
I can tell you from my standpoint and from the leadership standpoint, that's where our focus is on too.
Okay. Yeah. So, all right. Any further discussion? Did that prompt any other questions or comments from staff or the council? All right. So, at that point, I would entertain a motion.
Can you articulate the motion, please?
Motion would be to approve Resolution 2021-77, adopting the proposed budget and establishing the proposed tax levy payable in 2022.
I'll move that.
Second.
So we have a motion by Member Jackson, a second by Member Pierce. Is there further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. All right, so the next item we have is appointing acting mayor. Mr. Neal.
Well, thank you, Your Honor. You are our acting mayor, of course. So what we are looking for...
It's been short-lived.
So what we're asking tonight is, in case there is a very rare opportunity for us to have an emergency meeting while you are not available to attend, it would be good for us to have an interim acting mayor. Someone who could be in that position if we had to have a special meeting, an emergency meeting for something. We don't have anything planned, but that's the nature of the emergency, right? So we would ask you to appoint someone to be the interim acting mayor until the return of the mayor or the acting mayor.
Right, and I brought this up because it dawned on me that I'm leaving on vacation tomorrow as well. So with the mayor out and me out, if something came up, I wanted to make sure it was covered. So if Member Anderson is willing, we could use a motion to appoint him as acting mayor in the absence of the existing mayor and the existing acting mayor.
So moved.
Motion by Member Jackson.
Second.
Second by Member Pierce. Further discussion, objections from Member Anderson? Or all right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, Member Anderson. All right, next up, commission correspondence. Have we received anything since the packet?
We have not.
Okay. And then do we have anything for aviation noise update?
We do not.
All right, and then we're to mayor and council comments. Member Jackson, do you want to start us off?
Thank you, Your Honor. So a couple of things. One is we are now taking nominations for the Tom Oy Award. I hope people who know someone who's been active in human rights, that they will nominate them. This is always an annual award that we've honored some really special people. We had the Stop the Hate event on Sunday, September 12th, and that was a wonderful event. I want to thank everybody who put so much time and effort into planning it, to the speakers who raised so many interesting thoughts, and then to so many people who attended. But those are my thoughts, and It's the solstice today, and also the Moon Festival, the Chinese Moon Festival. So for people who celebrate the Chinese Moon Festival, we've got moon cakes at home I'm looking forward to, and those are my comments.
Very good. Member Anderson.
Thank you. I just wanted to note that this past Saturday, a couple of residents put together a commemoration of 9/11 and the 3,000 people who lost their lives on that day, but also primarily to recognize our own first responders here in Edina. Chief Milburn was present on that Saturday. Chief Slama was there. They were introduced, I think, kind of to the public by Mayor Hovland. And it was I thought it was very interesting. Nice day, lots of flags, taps played by two members of the high school band. Amazing Grace as well by those same young musicians. And then followed by, on Sunday, by the Stop the Hate, I guess I'll call that a presentation, which was here in this chamber. I thought well attended, speakers, some most live, one I believe that came in through the internet, and then an open mic, which I found to be fascinating and interesting to listen to the testimony of a number of Edina residents who had encountered issues in our city. And I found it to be edifying, and it's, you know, X number of people walk around the streets and say, boy, I don't see anything here. And so it's interesting to hear from people who do encounter hate and prejudice. And you say, gee whiz, you know what? This can happen here, and does. And so it was very useful and also televised to the public. I hope people had a chance to watch that. That's it for me. Thank you.
Well put. Member Pierce.
Just echo Member Anderson. So the Stop the Hate, I was traveling, so I wasn't able to be present, but there's a recording on YouTube. So if people want to still see it, they can. I think the intent behind that and many other things that we're doing in the city are really geared towards creating awareness and empathy. And from that is where that's the impetus for change. And so the other thing I would add is the Yancey Park dedication is October 4th at 4:30. And so if you can come out for that, that'd be great as well. And that's it for me.
On the calendar.
Yep.
Well, thanks. Good comments. I wanted to mention our city manager in my comments. For those who aren't aware, I had the opportunity to go to Duluth on Thursday evening to the Minnesota City Managers Association annual meeting and be present when Scott was awarded the Robert A. Barrett Award for Management Excellence by the city manager. And just to tell you a little bit about how big a deal this is, it recognizes a manager or administrator who is a role model, leader, and mentor in the local government management profession. And Scott is all of those things, and this is, as they say, there is nothing quite like the respect and admiration of your peers. And those are the people who awarded this to Scott, and it's a recognition that is well earned and deserved. And I was glad the mayor and I had a chance to go up. Chief Milburn was with us, Perry Vetter, Ryan Browning, and of course Lisa and Reese were up there as well. And Lisa was instrumental in helping move this along, but unfortunately was unable to get Scott to change out of his shorts for the presentation. And he was quite surprised. Also, his family was there, his wife and two of his three sons, one of whom traveled from Vienna after having been here in August, turned around and came back. And the most amazing part is we were all able to hide it from Scott, and he was totally flummoxed. So, Scott, I just wanted to again congratulate you on behalf of the council and the community, and we're proud to have you, and it's good to know that others recognize it as well.
Thank you. Flummoxed is the word. That was the word I was searching for.
I think you said in an email you almost forgot your wife's name.
Yeah, I've been a city manager for 30-some years. I should have introduced the mayor and 2 council members that were with me, but it was just, it was something I had lost a little bit of control over, so I should have done that.
Member Jackson was smart enough to go up and stay the night and come back, and Mayor Hovland and I went up and came back the same night in the middle of the rainstorm, but we managed not to steer off the road, although I was anxious in a few moments with the mayor driving. So anyway, well, congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, I have nothing else. Does that spark any other comments from anyone? Manager comments?
Yeah, I have 2 just very briefly. We have 2 events next week that are worth noting, and all 4 of you and others are invited to attend. One is the infrastructure tour is Monday night, and I think it's 5 to, there's nobody here that knows for sure. 5 to 7, unless you know for sure. 5 to 7. Yeah, 5 to 7 on Monday evening. We've got a bus, and if you want to be part of it, you can be part of it. Just let Jen Garski know, and she'll sign you up and send you the details. But this is something we've done a couple of years ago. Councilmember Jackson asked if we would do it again this year, so we have, and we've got 25 people that have RSVP'd from all of our boards and commissions, and it's a great opportunity for those folks to who have volunteered their time to the community to see the community in a way that they haven't before. And it was a good idea, and we're happy to do it. So we've got some additional capacity, so we want to try to fill those seats if we can. The other event is Chuck Marone is coming to town virtually on Tuesday. Chuck is pretty well known as the leader of the Strong Towns organization. He is a standout in the world of civil engineers because he does not ascribe to most of their fundamentals, and so therefore he's an interesting guy when it comes to transportation planning and transportation design. He's going to come as part of a training opportunity that the Planning Commission asked for in their work plan this past year. We've invited not only Planning Commission members, but also other board and commission members and council members and staff to attend a virtual session with Chuck that we're going to have that starts at 7 o'clock on Tuesday night. So we have a couple of opportunities for sort of professional development on the elected and appointed side, and we want you to know you're invited and welcome to attend. And Town Talks on Wednesday. Yeah. So Town Talk on Wednesday. This one will be about our fire apparatus, fire station planning, fire EMS responses, staffing, etc. is Wednesday night, and we'll be doing that from the council chambers at 7 o'clock. Busy week.
Very good.
And that's all I've got.
All right. Does that spark any other comments from council members? I want to apologize to Ms. Allison for being 13 minutes behind. I tried, but couldn't make it on time. Thank you all for your indulgence as I pinch hit for the mayor, and the job, as usual, is harder than he makes it look. So anyway, I'd take a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Oh. All in favor? I think it's not a debatable motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. Good night.